Hi, Dave Weiss here from amuckarts.com. Today I want to tell you one of my favorite stories. But before I can tell you that story, I'm going to paint. Now, there's one thing you need to know. Usually when I do this in a worship service, I have time during the worship music and all those other things to paint. I am a speed painter, so I go pretty fast. But in the interest of time, I'm going to speed things up a little bit. So here we go. I call this presentation Hurried, Buried, and Worried. It's a parable that Jesus told in Matthew 25, verses 14 to 30. Now, as a parable, what you need to know is it's not a true story. It's an illustration. It's a simple story Jesus told to help believers to understand something complicated. That's what parables are. That's the point of parables. In this parable, there's a man, perhaps a ruler, a king. I paint him as a king because in this story, he represents Jesus. And he's got servants. And he's about to go away on a journey, but before he goes away on his journey, he takes some of his wealth and he divides it among his servants. This then is the story. So Jesus tells this parable, again found in Matthew 25, verses 14 to 30. It's a parable about a man, a king, a ruler who's about to go away on a journey. But before he goes, he invests some of his wealth in his servants. He has 3 servants that are mentioned in the parable. The one servant, he gives 5 talents. Another, he gives 2 talents. Another, he gives 1 talent. And then the Bible says 5 words. 5 words that will radically change your life. If you will embrace these 5 words, it could change everything, especially as it relates to serving the Lord. Those 5 words are each according to his ability. Think about what that means. Each according to his ability means you never have to compare yourself with anyone else ever again. Ever. Because you get the comparison in the church is deadly, right? One of 2 things will happen if you start to compare yourself with other people. You will either look at them and say, they're so much better than me, I don't know why I would even try. Or they'll say, I'm so much better than them, I don't know why they try. It's either going to leave you conceited and proud, or it's going to leave you discouraged. And neither of those is helpful in the kingdom of God. But look at what the master does. He gives his servants different amounts of talents, which we'll get to in a second, each according to his ability. In other words, all you're responsible for is not to be better than the next person, but to be the very best you can be, doing the very best you can do with what God has given you. Each according to his ability. It's liberating. The next thing that I absolutely love is the name of this parable. It's called the parable of the talents. Now, if you look at your Bible, some Bibles will say, they'll call it the parable of the loaned money, or one calls it the parable of the bags of gold. I have to tell you the truth. I don't like either of those titles. I like the title that was given to this traditionally, which is the parable of the talents. See, because I believe that God can do amazing things. That God carries the truth of the Bible throughout all time. That a word that could mean something completely different back then can mean what it means to us today, and the principle still applies. Right? A talent back then was a large sum of money. It was a unit of measure, a unit of weight. It was a lot of money. It was gold. Today, a talent means what we think it means, a gift, an ability. And back then, talents were very valuable. And by the way, they're still valuable today. But there's something that's really cool about this that you really need to see. See, I think you would believe me and you would agree with me if I were to tell you that a pastor such as myself, part of our job is to help people to come to believe in God. I think you would believe that, right? This passage tells us something different. Oh, you still need to believe in God. But this verse tells us God believes in you. Think about it. The master gave some of his wealth to his servants. The master gave something of great value to each of his servants that his servants might be willing to use and invest for his kingdom. They would put what is his to work for him. The master is taking something of great value, he's placing it in their hands and trusting them to do something with it. In other words, the master is investing something of great value in them, which means the master believes in them. It's great to believe in God, and we need to. But always remember, this passage shows us that God believes in you. Now, we've looked at the talents, and we've looked at the master who represents Jesus. The servants represent us, so we need to look at them next. All right, so if the servants represent us, we should probably take a little time and look at them, right? So let's start with the 5-talent servant. You know this guy. You know this guy. Some of you went to high school with him. Some of you are him. You know this guy. This is the guy who was the captain of the football team, the baseball team, the basketball team, the debate team, the track team. They made up teams just so he could be captain. He's the guy girls love to date, the guy guys love to hate. He is the 5-talent guy, gifted beyond belief, and the master invested heavily in him. 5 talents. How much is a talent? As much as 20 years' wages. The master invests in him. Next, we come to the 2-talent guy. You know him too. The 2-talent guy was the guy you knew in school, who was always the first one on the practice field and the last one to leave. He was the first one to start studying and the last one to put down his book. This is the guy who lacks the natural ability the 5-talent guy has, but that's okay because we're not supposed to compare. But everything that he lacks in natural ability, he makes up for in hard work. This is the 2-talent guy. And the master invested heavily in him too. And then finally, we get to the 1-talent guy. I call him Skippy. Now, if your name is Skip or Skippy, I'm sorry, I don't know you, but I'm about to put some stuff on you, so please forgive me. This is Skippy, the 1-talent guy. You know him too. This is the guy who never applied himself. This is the guy who never did his homework, never went out for anything. This is the guy back in the 70s, those of you who remember the 70s. We had those t-shirts, remember those? That said, I'm with stupid. He got one of those. And then he went out all by himself. That's who he is. He's the 1-talent guy. But I want you to notice something. Because see, I love to talk about gifts and talents. It's one of my favorite things to speak about. And almost every time I've done it, someone has come up to me afterwards and they said, but Dave, I don't have a talent. Now, if that's you, if you believe that, I need to tell you something. I'm looking you right in the eye. You are believing a lie. Think about this. This is not a true story. It's an illustration, a simple story Jesus told to help believers to understand something complicated. The master represents him. The servants represent us. The talents represent his investment in us. He invested a talent up to 20 years' wages in Skippy. And if the master has invested in Skippy, then you need to know your master has invested in you. It is so important that we get this, because the story's about to move on. And the master goes away on his journey. And this is where the story gets complicated in a way, but it's also where we see Jesus taking the privilege of simplifying his story. Right? Because Jesus makes the story so simple. The 5-talent guy and the 2-talent guy, they take what the master has given them, they take the master's investment, and they double it. It says they went to work at once. In other words, right away. They got to work right away, and they doubled the master's money. What an amazing thing, right? But then we get to Skippy. Skippy has a problem. Skippy looks at this thing in his hand and goes, oh my word, that's a talent. That's a whole talent. That's 20 years' wages. And it's not mine. It belongs to the master. He wants me to do something with it, but what if I lose it? What if something happens? What if the market crashes? What if the banks fall through? What if someone steals it? What if? And after a while, he's what-ifing himself out to the tool shed. He's what-ifing himself out to the tool shed to get a shovel, to dig a hole, probably not a deep one, that would have required effort. But he gets a shovel, he digs a hole, and he buries the master's money. He buries what the master has invested in him. Now, again, I call this story Hurried, Buried, and Worried. But if I didn't call it Hurried, Buried, and Worried, you know what I'd call it? Don't be Skippy. Don't be Skippy. Skippy has a problem. Skippy has a problem that you might have. I know I've had it. There's something that he deals with, and I think you might deal with it too. And if you do, you are going to be so glad you are watching this today. Here it is. Skippy suffers from fear of failure. Have you been there? Have you suffered from fear of failure? You're going to be so glad that you are watching this right now, because I'm going to give you 2 ways to overcome fear of failure. The first one is really easy, but you might want to write this down. Get a pencil, write this down. It's 3 words. And these 3 words will help you to overcome your fear of failure forever. Are you ready? Here you go. You will fail. I know the ship has sailed on me being a motivational speaker, but it's true. You will fail. There's only 2 people who never fail. First one's God. People say God can do anything. No, that's not quite true. God can't sin, and God can't fail. The only other person who never fails is nowhere near as honorable, because the only other person who never fails is the person who never tries anything new. And by the way, that might be the greatest failure of them all, because here's the thing. If you do what you've always done, you'll get what you always got. Fear of failure holds us back from so many things. I think that's why Skippy buried what the master gave him. He has fear of failure. Thomas Edison. You remember Thomas Edison? Well, not personally, but you remember Thomas Edison. There's an old, probably apocryphal story about Thomas Edison. As you know, Thomas Edison invents the incandescent light bulb. And we don't really think much about it, because you can go to Walmart and see a whole run of those things. But we get the idea, because we've had 150 years of history or so between that invention and us, to make it think this was easy. That one day Thomas Edison walked into his laboratory in Menlo Park and went, "Let there be light." Poof. And there it was. How many of you know it didn't really work like that? The truth of the matter is, depending on which sources you read, Edison failed somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 times. In other words, before he made one that worked, he made at least 999 that didn't. Now, of course, when he made that one that worked, it changed the world. We don't think about that, but it changed the world. Did you ever work third shift? You know why you work third shift? Because Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. You see those wires that run up and down the streets everywhere you go? You know why they're there? Because Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. It changed everything. It changed history. And the old story goes that near the end of his life, Edison was being interviewed. And the reporter evidently knew something about the process that he had gone through to invent the light bulb. And they said, "Mr. Edison, what did it feel like to fail so many times?" You know what Edison said? He said, "I didn't fail. I learned 1,000 ways how not to make a light bulb." And it's true. Failure is unavoidable, especially if we're going to try new things. If you try new things, you're going to sometimes fail, but usually the only way to solve a problem is to try something new. And when you try something new, you're going to fail. We can't be afraid to fail. We can't fear failure. We simply need to learn from our mistakes and fail forward. We need to learn to fail forward. Skippy didn't do that. And he's about to have a problem because the master returns. The master returned from his journey. And when he did, he called his servants to him to give an account. In other words, he wants to see what they did with what he gave them. Well, the first guy, the 5-talent guy, comes up. He goes, "Master, look! You gave me 5 talents. I gained 5 more. I have 10 now." The master looks at him and says, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come, share in your master's happiness." Next, the 2-talent guy comes up to him. He goes, "Master, look! You gave me 2 talents. I gained 2 more. I have 4 now." First of all, notice what the master doesn't say. The master doesn't say, "That's great, but why can't you be more like the other guy?" He doesn't do that. The master knows what he has invested in this servant. He knows what the servant is capable of. He gave each according to his ability. The master sees the servant was faithful, and Jesus constructs the story in such a way that he says the exact same thing. "Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come, share in your master's happiness. Come to my party." These 2 guys have gone before the master. They've shown what they've done, and now it's Skippy's turn. Remember, when those 2 guys, it says they went to work at once, right away. In other words, they hurried. Skippy buried. Now Skippy's worried. See, he sees these bags of gold before his fellow servants, and in his hand is a dirty bag. A dirty bag. And he's scared. And I get it, because I have let fear of failure slow me down and keep me from doing things too. He's scared, I get that. But what I will never get is what he did with it. He holds this thing in his hand. He looks the master in the eye and says, "I know you. You're a hard man. You reap where you haven't sown. You gather where you haven't scattered seed. And so I was afraid. Here's what belongs to you." Skippy made his disobedience about the master. Now, I know what you might be thinking. You might be thinking, "But Dave, I've had bosses like that. I've had bosses who've taken credit for other people's ideas. I've had bosses who've cut corners. I've had bosses who've done all kinds of stuff. I get why he was afraid. I get why he did what he did." But if you're thinking that, you're forgetting something. This is a parable. It's not a true story. It's an illustration, a simple story Jesus used to help believers to understand something complicated. The servants in the story represent us. The master represents God. 2 things God can't do. Remember, God can't fail. He also can't sin. He doesn't sin. He doesn't reap where he hasn't sown. He doesn't gather where he hasn't scattered seed. It's impossible for him to do this. You know why? Everything already belongs to him. The master is not the problem here. The problem is Skippy. Skippy has been afraid, and he's allowed his fear to keep him from using what the master has invested in him. The master believes in Skippy. The problem is Skippy doesn't believe in the master. Okay, let me build that up, okay? See, I want to play Skippy's advocate for a second. These two guys, right? These two guys right here. What did they do? They invested what the master gave them. Was it their money? No. It belonged to the master. They were supposed to use what their master had given them. And Jesus makes the story so simple, right? He makes the story so simple. They took what they were given and they doubled it. Everybody wins. But I would argue that Skippy played it safe. So why is he mad at Skippy? See, these two guys, they took what the master gave them and they put it at risk. Because you know, investing doesn't always work like that, right? If every time you invested you doubled, everybody would quit what they do and just be investors. Investor doesn't work like that. Sometimes you win, that's true, but sometimes you lose and lose big. They could have lost what the master gave them. Why is the master mad at Skippy and not mad at them? I'll tell you. Those two guys trust the master. They trust the master to be good, win or lose. And Skippy didn't. Don't be Skippy. Friend, the master is good. And the master loves you. And the master has invested in you at least one talent, maybe many, because he knows what you can do and he believes in you. Trust the master. Don't be Skippy. Trust the master. The giver of gifts is good and he loves you. Your gifts, your talents, your abilities have been given by the master for you to serve him in this kingdom, to glorify him and show others the way. He is good and he loves you. So trust him and do what he says and use your gifts to the best of your ability. You are gifted, you are talented, you are everything you need to be, and God has given you everything you need to do what he has called you to do. If it's not inside you, he'll put someone beside you, but you can do what God has called you to do. So take what you've been given and use it to God's glory. Do it now. Hurry. And don't worry. And whatever you do, don't bury. There's a verse in 1 Peter 4:10. It says this: each one should use whatever gifts he has received to serve others. I think that's God's command for you today. Use those gifts, use those talents. Show the world how good God is by doing everything he has put inside you to do. Don't worry whether or not you're good enough. You have everything you need. He has given it to you. And what he has given, he will use. So don't bury it. Put it out for the world to see. And trust that God can do amazing things with it. May God bless you today. And may he inspire you to use what you've been given by a good master who loves you.